أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، حمدا كثيرا طيبا طاهرا مباركا فيه، أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا، وزدنا من لدنك علما نافعا يا أرحم الراحمين. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and peace and blessings be upon His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. As we continue with the Khilafah of Uthmaan Ibn Affan radiyallahu anhu wa ardah, the Nurayn, and we ended last week with how Uthman radiyallahu anhu refuted and debated the rebels with some of the points that they had raised against him, and all of the points were refuted by Uthman radiyallahu anhu. And everything that they had brought forward against Uthman was refuted by Uthman there and then, and the answer was ready by Uthman radiyallahu anhu. And it's something very important to understand that the people who had followed those who were spreading fitna, their intention wasn't as evil or as severe as those heads that were running the fitna. Meaning that, and you can see it today a lot of the times, it's very easy to play with the mind of someone who is ignorant. It's very easy to play with the mind of someone who doesn't have knowledge, doesn't have a background. It's very easy to convince someone of something who doesn't have a background, especially when you are quoting verses, you are quoting a hadith, you are calling them to something that is good. As we said, the banner that they had lifted was al-amru bil-ma'ruf wal-nahy anil munkar, to enjoin the good and to forbid the bad. So this was a banner that attracted a lot of people. And this attraction, or this, the way that they got attracted to this banner is because of what these people had mentioned, and because they were far away from the Sahaba and the generation of the Sahaba. They didn't have any connection with them, direct connection with them, so they were able to fall into this fitna. So Uthman radiyallahu anhu, when he refuted them and he responded to that which they had mentioned very calmly, in an easy manner, they still didn't listen to him. They still didn't listen to him radiyallahu anhu. And after he had left, we said that he had went to Al-Kufa and Al-Basra, and he had confronted them there, and he spoke to them there, and he clarified the points that they brought forward against him, clarified everything. And then he went back to Medina. The people of fitna began again spreading and playing with their mind, playing with their minds and taking them back to their old mentality and fighting and going against Uthman radiallahu anhu. Now, the people of fitna, as we mentioned, that they had agreed that the 35th year after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be the year that they would implement their plan, would be the year that they would execute their planning, and they would head towards Medina, and that they would plot, or their plot, to attack Uthman in Medina and to force him to either give up the Khilafah or to be killed. One of the two. Meaning they went to Medina, they headed towards Medina with the intention of one of two things. Either he gives up the Khilafah, he steps down as Khalifa, or he faces the sword. One of the two options. There's no third option between them. They decided that they would come and they would approach Medina from three different regions. One group would come from Egypt, where Abdullah bin Saba was. One group would come from Al-Kufa. One group would come from Al-Basra. So they wouldn't come all from the same region. They would come separately, so that not to cause much attention towards them. So they would come from these three different regions. And they left at the time of Hajj with the Hujjaj. They left at the time of Hajj with the pilgrims who were leaving for Hajj disguising themselves in the caravans that are heading towards Mecca or heading towards Medina, and then from Medina to Mecca, disguise themselves amongst them that they are going to perform Hajj, so that they won't rise or no flags will be raised against them. Now we're going to Hajj. We're traveling with the pilgrims towards Al-Hajj. And in Shawwal, the 35th year after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, they had reached the outskirts of Medina. They had reached the outskirts of Medina, meaning after Ramadan comes the month Shawwal. So at the end of Shawwal, they had reached the outskirts of Medina. And they were on the outskirts of Medina. Now they came from Egypt in 4 groups. Each group had a leader, and then that group had a leader itself. So there was one main leader, and there was 4 leaders that were under them. Each one had a number of men with them. So they were very organized. They were very organized in the way that they had come to Medina. The 4 leaders that came from Egypt, amongst them, all of them, is Abdullah bin Saba. He's amongst them. But there was 4 leaders. Abdullah bin Saba, what he did, he took himself out of the position of leadership. He didn't put himself as a leader. He put himself amongst them. And he's like the spiritual guide. He's like the one who's guiding them. He's not a leader. He's the one who's guiding them. So there was 4 leaders that came from Egypt. Abdurrahman ibn Udays al-Balawi, Kinan ibn Bishr al-Tajibi, Sakhudan ibn Himran al-Sakuni, and Qutayra ibn Fallan al-Sakuni, and their Amir of those 4 was Al-Ghafiqi ibn Harb al-Akki. Al-Ghafiqi, a known name, remember that name. Al-Ghafiqi ibn Harb al-Akki. He was the leader of the group that came from Egypt. And they had 4 leaders, and they were 1,000. And they had 1,000 men who came from Egypt. From Al-Kufa, there was also 1,000 men. Their umara, their leaders, was Zayd ibn Sawhan al-Abdi al-Ashtar al-Nakha'i, whose name we've mentioned before. He was one of the ones who was sent to Muawiyah and then sent to Abdurrahman ibn Khalid ibn al-Walid. Al-Ashtar al-Nakha'i, Ziyad ibn al-Nadir al-Harithi, Abdullah ibn al-Asam, and their Amir was Amr ibn al-Asam. Their Amir from Al-Kufa was Amr ibn al-Asam. From Al-Basra, there was also 1,000 men. They had 4 umara. They had 4 leaders, whom were Hakim ibn Jabala al-Abdi, the one we mentioned. When Abdullah ibn Saba, he came to Al-Basra, he stayed in his house. He was known for his what? He was known to be a thief, to be a troublemaker, to be someone who was under house arrest. And Abdullah bin Saba, at that time, he came, he stayed with him. And then the governor of Al-Basra, when he found out about them, he kicked Abdullah bin Saba out of Al-Basra. And Hakim ibn Jabala, he stayed there. Al-Abdi, he stayed there, and he continued the path of Abdullah ibn Saba. So Hakim ibn Jabala al-Abdi, Durayh ibn Abbad al-Abdi, Bishr ibn Shurayh al-Isi, and then Ibn al-Muharrish ibn Abd al-Hinaqi, and the Amir was Hurqus ibn Zuhair al-Sa'di. So each from Egypt 1,000, from Al-Basra 1,000, from Al-Kufa 1,000. Each 1,000 had 4 umara, 4 leaders, and each of them had 1 leader. So they came very organized. They came to Medina very organized, with an intention or with a plan on their hands. Now what they had called for and what they came with the intention, the people of Egypt, they wanted Ali ibn Abi Talib as Khalifa. That was their call, or that was their what they wanted, and that's what they were asking. They wanted Ali ibn Abi Talib as Khalifa. The people of Al-Kufa, they wanted Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awam as Khalifa, and the people from Al-Basra wanted Talha ibn Ubaidillah. And this was planned, this was pre-organized to cause fitna between the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Egypt wants Ali ibn Abi Talib, Al-Kufa wants Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awam, and Al-Basra wants Talha ibn Ubaidillah. So they did this with the intention, with the intention of trying to cause fitna amongst the Sahaba, amongst these companions who were known to try and cause fitna between them, and to try to justify the approach, or to try to justify why they had come to Medina. That we want Ali ibn Abi Talib, we want Talha, we want Zubayr. We don't want anyone from ourselves. But their intention is to stir up fitna between the Sahaba and to cause division. To cause division. The greatest enemy on Islam, or from the greatest enemies of Islam, is dividing the ummah. Dividing the ummah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and do not divide, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, don't divide, فَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. Once you divide, khalas, you no longer have a stance. You no longer have power, you no longer have a position. Division breaks the back of the ummah. Division breaks the back of the ummah. So they wanted to cause division amongst the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. At that time, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they denied and they didn't agree or accept any of their calls. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Talha, wa Zubayr, they didn't accept any of their calls. Now as they approached Medina, news had reached to Uthman that they were on the outskirts of Medina. At that time, Uthman radiallahu anhu wasn't in Medina, he was in a village just outside Medina. He was in a village just outside Medina. So when they heard that he was in that village, they directed themselves and they headed towards Uthman. Now Uthman radiallahu anhu, it's not mentioned what village it was or where it was exactly, but the first ones to reach Medina, the first ones to speak to Uthman were the people who come from Egypt. They were the first ones to arrive, and they were the first ones to reach and to talk to Uthman. So they came to Uthman radiallahu anhum, and Uthman is waiting for them. As we mentioned before, Uthman radiallahu anhu had placed 2 spies amongst them. He had placed 2 spies amongst them. Uthman radiallahu anhu wasn't ignorant. Uthman radiallahu anhu wasn't, as they say, he was sort of ignoring the fact that there is a fitna happening and didn't want to deal with it. No, Uthman knew what was happening. Uthman radiallahu anhu, he knew exactly what was happening. But Uthman radiallahu anhu, he had taken the approach of not being the one who takes the first step towards them, or not being the instigator with them, because he didn't want to allow a breakout to happen. So he left them, okay, you come to me, and we can discuss and we can make sure, or we can see how we are able to come to an agreement. So they came to Uthman radiallahu anhu and they said to him, call for the mushaf, or bring a mushaf forward. They said, open to the 7th surah. The 7th surah, Surah Sabi'ah, as known back then, is Surah Yunus, the surah of Yunus. So he opened the surah radiallahu anhu and he read until he reached the verse, قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ مِنْ رِزْقٍ فَجَعَلْتُمْ مِنْهُ حَرَامًا وَحَلَالًا قُلْ اللَّهُ أَمَرَكُمْ قُلْ اللَّهُ أَذِنَ لَكُمْ أَمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَفْتَرُونَ. They recited, they reached the verse, they told Uthman to recite. Uthman recited. Uthman's going along with them. Uthman recited because Uthman knew that these weren't the heads. Uthman knew that these weren't the heads. He knew that these people can be changed. So Uthman, he went along with him. He recited from Surah Yunus up until the verse, قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ, the verse that we recited, which is the 59th verse. Yani Uthman's reciting with them and he's going along with them. 59 verses he recites. And then they tell him to stop at that verse. The verse, the translation of it is قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ مِنْ رِزْقٍ. Say to them, O Muhammad, to the polytheists of Mecca, tell them about the sustenance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed or has sent upon you. فَجَعَلْتُم مِّنْهُ حَرَامًا وَحَلَالًا. And then you made, they're saying to Muhammad, you made from it haram and you made some of it halal. Then they said to them, to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, قُلْ اللَّهُ أَذِنَ لَكُمْ. Then Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's saying to say to them, قُلْ, say to them, Muhammad, did Allah allow you or give you permission to do so? Or are you making this up upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Here they're trying to bring a point forward to Uthman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you certain things and you're making halal and haram from your own mind. You're making this halal, you're making this haram, you're changing on your own desires. This is what they're accusing Uthman radiallahu anhu with. They said, stop. They said, what do you think about the land that you set aside for grazing? Al-Hima, Ardul Hima. Has Allah permitted you to do so, or do you invent a lie against Allah? Or do you invent a lie against Allah? They're trying to debate with Uthman radiallahu anhu. He said, I will tell you, this verse was revealed concerning such and such. And this verse that you're reciting has nothing to do with what you are bringing forward. This verse was revealed concerning a totally different issue. A totally different issue. That's why, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam, ulum al-Qur'an, the sciences of Qur'an, is one of the most important sciences for the person to understand the Qur'an. For the person to understand the Qur'an. Imam al-Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions in his book Al-Itqan fi ulum al-Qur'an a saying of one of the early generation scholars. He mentions 25 different sciences. Al-Nasikh wal-Mansukh, Al-Mujmal wal-Mushrik. All the different sciences, he mentions over 25 of them. 25 sciences related to the Qur'an. He says, until a person is well grounded in these sciences, he should not talk about the tafsir of a verse. Until the person is well grounded in these sciences, in the sciences of Qur'an, that person should not talk and speak about the tafsir of the Qur'an. Because from the sciences of Qur'an is knowing asbab al-nuzul, knowing the reasons for revelation. From the science of the Qur'an, the reasons for revelation, what does that benefit you? Knowing the reason for revelation, asbab al-nuzul. Knowing the reason of revelation gives you an understanding to how and for what the verse was revealed for. At what time, what was happening, what was going on? Is it a specific verse? Is it a general verse? And so forth. So asbab al-nuzul, the reasons for revelation, and al-nasikh wal-mansukh, the abrogated verses and those verses that have been abrogated. Knowing al-nasikh wal-mansukh, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu, once he walked by the masjid, and in the masjid there was a man who what they used to call al-wa'idh. They used to have men who would sit in the masjid, like you have today, du'at and so forth. They sit in the masjid, they give a talk, an inspirational talk. They give people reminders. They're not ulama, they're not scholars, but they are put in that position. So he approaches one of them and he says, do you know or do you have the knowledge of al-nasikh wal-mansukh? He says, no, I do not. He says, إِذَنْ هَلَكْتَ وَأَهْلَكْتَ. He said to that man, he says, then you have destroyed yourself and you've destroyed those who are around you. If you do not know the sciences or the science of al-nasikh wal-mansukh. So here Uthman radiallahu anhu, he says, this verse was revealed concerning such and such. It's got nothing to do with what you were mentioning. It's the furthest away from what you were mentioning that you can imagine. There's no way for you to bring this according. He says, as for the grazing land, Umar radiallahu anhu allocated it before me for the camels of zakat. For the camels of zakat. Al-Muslimin, as we mentioned before, the Muslimin during the time of Umar and during the time of Uthman, the Muslimin had opened their eyes to a lot of wealth. Camels, cows, sheep, gold, silver, jewelry, whatever you want. Yani imagine the safes and the private collections of Kisra himself, the emperor of Persia himself, were taken by the Muslimin. That in itself enriched the lands of the Muslimin by hundreds of times. So with that increased the zakat. The more wealth that you increase, the more zakat that you have to pay. Zakat you pay every year. If you've reached the nisab, you've reached the threshold of zakat, which is, if it's calculated by gold, around $6,000, give or take, depending on the price of gold. If you've reached the threshold of zakat and 1 year has gone by, how much do you have to pay? 2.5. 2.5% of your wealth. Yani for every $100, you pay $2.50. You pay $2.50 for every $100. After you've reached that threshold. After you've reached that threshold. So here that 2.5%, that's with money. With camels, you've reached a certain amount of camels, you have to give such and such. Sheep, the same. You've reached a certain amount of sheep that you have for grazing, that you have for trading purposes, you have to pay zakat. So here the camels, one of the most beloved things to the Arab was what? Camels. Many times the Nabi ﷺ gave examples on things that it is much better for you than humur al-ni'am. Humur al-ni'am is like the most expensive type of camels. Pure breed, beautiful, big stands, kada. Even till today, we look at a camel and we don't give it, it doesn't move us anything. If anything, camels to us are pests, because we're not brought up in that environment. You go to Saudi Arabia, you go to these countries, camels to them, they take care of their camels sometimes more than take care of their own families. Some of them, they do the camel races and they do the camel marches and they do the camel, who's got the best camel, who's got the biggest, the best looking camel, who's got the one with the biggest, I don't know what they call it even, the hump, who's got the one with this, who's got the one. They are very, they indulge themselves in this matter. So here the people, the Arab, they purchased camels. They bought camels and they had taken a lot of camels. So during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, he had purchased a land, or he had put a land under the authority of the Khilafah for the camels that are gathered for zakat to graze in. Because they need somewhere to graze. The camels need somewhere to eat. So during the time of Uthman, what happened? Those camels increased. Those camels increased. So Uthman, he made that land larger. So what did the people come? The first thing they said, you expanded that land from the money of the Muslimin, but you took it to yourself. He said, you expanded that land and you put your own camels there. Look how dirty that accusation is. Look how dirty that accusation is. Yani they're accusing Uthman radiallahu anhu of stealing from the Muslimin. Of stealing from the Muslimin. The person, a normal person, honest person who lives honestly, the worst thing someone can come to you and say, that you are dishonest, that you robbed me of my money. The worst thing someone can say, especially when you know that you are what? That you are honest. When you know that you've done the job and you've even put in more. For instance, a person who's a tradie, he goes, he does the job, he finishes the job, he quotes it a certain amount, and then he ends up having to put a bit more, and he says, khalas, he's not going to take more, he's just going to do the job. And then after he does that, the people come and he says, but you robbed me. You gave me a different quote. You didn't give me the right quote. Someone gave me a cheaper. Things that are, it hurts very much. So Uthman radiallahu anhu, during the time of Umar, and then Uthman, he increased it, and this was something that was done before me by the Khulafa before me, so I didn't do anything I didn't do anything new. I didn't invent anything. It was already done before me. They did not say anymore, and then they started to bring other verses. And I say, what about this verse, Uthman? This is regarding, that's not for it. This verse was revealed concerning such and such. It's not for you to use. So after they quoted a number of verses, they came down and they said, Khalas, we're not going to debate with you anymore. Because every time they bring a verse forward, Uthman would what? Would refute them. You're talking about a companion who lived the revelation of the Qur'an. You're talking about a companion who was one of the companions who had memorized the Qur'an. Not only memorized it, studied it. Studied it. So you're coming to Uthman, to someone like Uthman, and you're trying to what? You're trying to debate with him something related to the revelation of the Qur'an. Well, he's lived it. He's lived it. He was there when the Qur'an was being revealed, and then they're trying to come and debate with him the reason of revelation of these verses, and they're trying to put it upon Uthman radiallahu anhu. So when they lost hope, they agreed with him and they came to an agreement. Okay, we'll make a deal with you, O Uthman. And Uthman agreed. Uthman's approach radiallahu anhu was, go with them as much as you can. Go with them, walk with them, see what they want. Give them what they want. And as you see, the agreements that they made here, the 5 agreements that they made, the conditions that they put, you think, what's the point in putting this? There's no point in putting this upon Uthman radiallahu anhu. So he agreed with them, and they stipulated conditions for Uthman, and Uthman had put conditions upon them that first and foremost they do not break the gathering of the Muslimin, to not divide the Muslimin and to not cause division amongst the Muslimin. That was the first and main condition of Uthman. Stop causing division. Stop causing trouble amongst the Muslimin. You should not rebel and not split the main body of the Muslimin. As we mentioned, this is one of the worst thing and something that will destroy the ummah, when you divide the main body of the Muslimin. So long as these conditions are fulfilled. So Uthman radiallahu anhu, after this initial agreement, Uthman radiallahu anhu, he sent Ali ibn Abi Talib. He sent Ali ibn Abi Talib and another companion that is not named in the narrations. He sent Ali ibn Abi Talib to put forward these conditions, to see, okay, what do you want? What do you want from me so I can organize for you, or so that we can agree upon, to negotiate. And they agreed on the following. The first is that the one who was banished could return to Medina, or the one that was banished from his region could return to his region. Meaning the one that was in Al-Basra and was banished from Al-Basra could return. The one that was in Al-Kufa and he was banished from Al-Kufa, he can return to Al-Kufa, and so forth. Anyone who was banished from their region can return to it. Uthman, he agreed. He said the one who was deprived from a stipend would be given to him. And Uthman radiallahu anhu, he agreed to it. He said the fay would be shared out. The fay would be shared out. Al-fay is that booty of war that is obtained without any fighting. The booty of war, you have al-fay wal-ghanima. Al-fay is when it happens without fighting. The other party, the other side surrenders and they enter and they take the booty of war. This is called fay. Al-ghanima is when there's fighting. When there's a clash between the two, it's called ghanima. So when there is fay, it would be distributed amongst the Muslimin. He said that he would be fair in dividing the spoils. They're telling Uthman to what? They're telling Uthman to be fair. And the Nabi ﷺ before him, when the Arabi came to him, the Bedouin, they came to him, they said, Oh Rasulullah, a'dil. Imagine someone coming to the Prophet ﷺ and telling the Prophet ﷺ, be fair, O Rasulullah. Nabi ﷺ says, and who else would be fair if I'm not fair? Who else is going to be fair if I'm not going to be fair? And coming up to the Prophet ﷺ, i'dil. be fair. And they're telling Uthman to be fair. And these are all of these that are mentioned, they're like shots to Uthman. And what you were doing before, you were breaking these conditions. And Uthman wasn't being fair, Uthman wasn't dividing the fate, Uthman wasn't doing this, and Uthman is agreeing. Ali ibn Abi Talib was sent with instructions to agree with them. Khalas, go along with them with what they want. He would employ people of honesty and ability. He would employ governors who were honest and who had the ability to be governors. And this is as well another strike at Uthman. And as if Uthman radiallahu anhu was employing people who were what? Dishonest, didn't have the ability. He was employing them just for the fact that they were either close to him in relation or for the fact that he wanted to employ them there. This is another strike at Uthman radiallahu anhu. And this was documented, and it also was stipulated that Ibn Amr would return as governor of Al-Basra, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari would remain governor of Al-Kufa. Ibn Amr, he would return as governor, would be reinstated as governor in Al-Basra, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, as we mentioned before, the confrontation that happened in Al-Kufa when they came out to the street and they requested that the governor be changed, and they requested Abu Musa, so Abu Musa, he can stay as what? He can stay as governor in Al-Kufa. This is what they requested, and it was documented and it was agreed upon between them. And then after this document was done, the people who had come from the different regions, they left. They left. Khalas, what they wanted or what they thought was happening wrongly and what they asked for from Uthman gave it to them. So now there's no reason for them to what? Now there's no reason for them to stay and to cause fitna. As we said, those who were following are different to those who were leading. Those who were leading, those who were planting the thoughts of fitna, their intention was to divide, to cause fitna, to cause an uproar, to cause whatever it is you want to call it. Those who are following, they're just following the banners. They're just following Amr bil Ma'ruf, Nahi al Munkar. They're just following, we need to change, we need to make it Islah, they're just following that. Their intention is not to cause fitna as much as those who were leading. And that's why we mentioned from Egypt, 1,000 men came out. On each, from that 1,000 there was 4 leaders. 4 leaders. And the reason, some of the ulama, they mentioned that from the reasons that they put 4 leaders on 1,000 men is to make sure that they don't what? That they don't go on their own and start to change their mind. Now after they met with Ali ibn Abi Talib, imagine, and first you're talking to Uthman. Dhin Nurayn, the man whom Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam gave him the glad tidings of Jannah. The one who Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam married him to 2 of his daughters, on separate occasions of course. He got married to Zainab first, she died, then got married to his second daughter. The man that the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam considered to be and was pleased with him. He's from the companions that the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam توفي عنه أو توفي وهو عنه راض. He passed away and he was pleased with Uthman. And yet they are coming and they are what? Debating with him. Not only that, and then with Ali radiallahu anhu. Sometimes you have a person, he goes and debates with a sheikh, or he wants to understand from a sheikh kada. To understand, he's sitting in front of a sheikh, even though he must be very respectful towards that sheikh and respect his knowledge. And then he comes back, but now the sheikh said this kada, and you give and take with him. But here you're talking about Ali radiallahu anhu. You're talking about them debating or them sitting and talking with Ali radiallahu anhu, or with Uthmaan Ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, or with Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, or with Talha, or with Az-Zubayr. They're talking to men who witnessed the revelation to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So after they had agreed with Ali radiallahu anhu, they left. They were content with what they agreed upon. That's what they wanted. They were content with the treaty. When this happened, the people of fitna, the heads that were there, they realized that their plan was starting to fail. That they didn't expect Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhu, they didn't expect Uthman especially to go along with them and to agree with them to the extent that they did. So they have to come up with a new plan to reignite the fitna. To reignite the fitna. We can't just let it go. We've been plotting and planning. As I mentioned before, this is not something that happened day and night. This is not something that took a month or a year. This was a 6-year plan. A 6-year plan from the 30th after the Hijrah until the 35th, end of the 35th in Shawwal, the plotting and planning was happening. So we can't just let all that plotting and planning go to loss. If we don't take this opportunity now, it's never going to happen again. The Hujjaj are going to Mecca, Medina. A lot of the inhabitants of Medina are going to Mecca. Uthman didn't allow for any of the armies to be deployed in Medina. He didn't want them to become muzahama between the people of Medina and the armies, so that they become very tight amongst each other. So he didn't have any army in Medina. He refused the request of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu to send him an army. So Medina here is half of it's gone to Mecca to perform Hajj, and the people are going to Mecca to perform Hajj. There is no other time better than this. This is when we need to strike, and this is where we need to do and implement our plan. So they came up with a plan to stir and reignite the fitna. To reignite the fitna. What they had done previously, they had forged letters of Sahaba. Meaning that they would send letters to different provinces, to different regions, forged upon the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Aisha, Talha, Zubayr, Ali, and the different companions, they would forge letters in their names, talking about Uthman and talking about the Khilafah and talking about Kada, and all of this is lies. So what they did, as the group from Egypt is returning home, and why did they choose the group from Egypt? Because they were the first ones to meet Uthman. So they forged a letter with the seal of Khilafah, with the seal of Uthman, the seal of the Amir al-Mu'mineen radiallahu anhu. It was sealed with him under his name and sealed with his ring. The ring of the Khilafah, which they used to seal their letters with. And they sent a rider to go towards the people who were going back to Egypt. And what this rider was doing was, he'd approach them, then he'd go back. He'd come near them, then he'd go back. They're oblivious of what's happening. The group that are going to Egypt, they don't know what's happening. So this man is going and he's coming back. Going and coming back. He's teasing them. And then when he came and approached, they catched him, or they caught him. When they searched him, they found a letter. They found a letter on him with the seal of Khilafah. With the seal of Khilafah from Uthman. They said, "Who are you?" He said, "I am the messenger of the Khalifa going to the governor of Egypt. I have a letter from the Khalifa Uthman that I am taking it to the governor of Egypt, to deliver it to the governor of Egypt." It bore the Uthman seal that was a forgery addressed to his governor. It contained orders from Uthman to crucify them, or kill them, or cut off their hands and feet. It was a letter that opened the letter from Amir al-Mu'mineen Uthman to the governor of Egypt. When these men, or when those who come from Medina arrive in Egypt, either crucify them, kill them, or cut off their feet and hands. Cut off their feet and hands. These are the ones who they are preaching fasad, corruption in the land. This is what they said. This is what was in the letter. from Uthman to his governor. It was a forgery, of course, from Uthman to his governor. Now when they opened that letter, and that was the content of the letter, they returned to Medina. They returned to Medina. The funny thing that happened is that the people of Egypt returned to Medina, followed straight away by the people of Al-Kufa and Al-Basra, coming in and asking why was that letter sent, giving orders to kill the people of Egypt. And bearing in mind, there's no form of messaging, calling, texting, sending. It's all done by written letter. Meaning that the people from Egypt returned to Medina simultaneously from Al-Kufa wal Basra. They came the same time. What's this letter? So Uthman radiallahu anhu, before he addressed that matter, he said, okay, I am denying what's in that letter. The only way for you to prove it is to bring 2 Muslim witnesses who testify that I was the one who wrote that letter, or you take my oath, or you accept my oath. He says, by Allah, alladhi la ilaha illa huwa, I didn't write it. It wasn't me who I did not write it, nor did I dictate it, or have any knowledge about it. Nothing. That's my oath. You either bring 2 witnesses who testify otherwise, that I was the one who had written it. Now the ulama, they go in detail in refuting the whole letter itself, but Uthman, he denied it. And then when Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he came and he heard about what had happened, he said, this is something that has been planned in the darkness of night. This is something that was planned. How can the people of Al-Kufa and Al-Basra simultaneously know about the letter and arrive at the same time with the people of Egypt? How can that happen? It's something that is planned. It's something that was planned by the people of Fitna. So when they returned to Medina, and Uthman, he approached them and denied the letter and said that it's a forgery, it had nothing to do with me. He took the oath, he made an oath to them. They didn't believe him and they didn't accept. Khalas, in their mind, they want to cause fitna. They want to cause troubles. It's like talking to what? It's like talking to a brick wall. Even time after time, Uthman has spoken to them, Ali has spoken to them, Sahaba have spoken to them, nothing's what? Nothing's entering. They're not able to understand anything that's taking place. So when they entered into Medina, there's no sound and detailed narrations of the exact moment that they took Medina by siege, and that they surrounded Medina and they took control of Medina. But some of the narrations narrate that Uthman radiallahu anhu was addressing the people one day, and a man called A'yun, he would stand up and he would say to Uthman, he interrupted him saying, "Oh Na'thil," which is a form of disrespect towards Uthman. That's what they used to call him. That's what they used to call Uthman. Wal-'iyadhu billah, yani making fun and mockery and disrespecting Uthman in the masjid. In the masjid. They said, "Oh Na'thil, you have changed." They're speaking to Uthman, "You have changed." Uthman said, "Who is this?" Keeping in mind, Uthman here was in his 80s. Uthman was in his 80s. He's 83 years old. He's not a young man. He's not in his 40s or his 50s or even his 60s. The man was in his 80s. So he says, "Who is this?" They said, "It is A'yun." He said, "Rather you have changed, O slave." The people, they jumped onto him and they started to beat him. He's addressing the Amir al-Mu'mineen in that way. Until a man from Bani Layth took him to his house and put him in his house. And then it is mentioned after this that the rebels, the fitna people, the troublemakers, whatever you want to call them, they came and they took over Medina. Now Uthman radiallahu anhu during the first period, and this remained for a month and a half, from the time they reached the outskirts of Medina to the time in which Uthman was killed in his house was a month and a half. 1 month and a half. During this time, in the beginning, they would allow, the first couple of days, they would allow Uthman to go out to the masjid, to pray in the masjid and so forth. When they saw that this was causing troubles for them, they didn't allow him to enter or to come to the masjid anymore, and they appointed one of their own to lead the prayers. In Masjid al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, imagine. In Masjid al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they appointed one of their own to lead the prayers. Until a companion, he came up to Uthman radiallahu anhu, he said, "Oh Uthman," he's seeking his advice. Imagine he's entering, at that time, he's entering into the masjid, and the people who have put Uthman under house arrest are leading the prayer. Not in any masjid, in Masjid al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In Masjid al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So he goes to Uthman radiallahu anhu, he says, "Oh Uthman, I want your advice." He says what? He says, "I don't feel comfortable going and praying in the masjid, going and praying behind this man. I don't feel comfortable knowing what they have done and knowing what their plans are." What was the response of Uthman? Did Uthman tell him, "Yes, better go sit at home, don't pray behind him, go find another jama'ah, begin your own jama'ah and pray in your home by yourself"? Did he say to him, "Go and leave and do"? He said no. He said to him, "Go and pray, for your presence there is more important. Your presence there and your praying in the masjid of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam is more important." This is how they understood, this is how they implemented the knowledge that they inherited from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is how they inherited not only the knowledge, the manners from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way to deal with things when the time gets hard, the way to deal with matters when it's as if the whole world has crumbled upon you. They learned how to deal with this. And Uthman radiallahu anhu, he dealt with it in the best way possible. He dealt with it in the best way possible. When Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, when we mentioned before, Muawiyah, he came to Uthman, he said, "Uthman," first he told him, "I'll bring the armies to Medina and they'll surround Medina, they'll protect Medina." He said, "No, that's impossible." He said, "Okay, come with me to Ash-Sham." He said, "Come with me to Ash-Sham. At least there I can protect you. At least there I am able to provide protection for you." The people of Ash-Sham, they were very loyal towards Muawiyah, because Muawiyah was a good governor. Umar had put him as governor before and he was pleased with him. And Uthman kept him as governor. What was the response of Uthman radiallahu anhu? He says, "I will not give up. I will not give up being close to the Prophet ﷺ for anything. This is the most important thing to me, being next to the Prophet ﷺ, being buried in Al-Baqi'. Give me the whole world and everything that is in it in replace for me to leave Medina, so I won't leave Medina. I won't leave being the neighbor of the Prophet ﷺ." And these people, they entered into the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ and they disrespected the presence. They disrespected the masjid. And that's why Uthman radiallahu anhu didn't want them to disrespect the masjid. Didn't want them to disrespect. The Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is buried. For whoever's been to Masjid al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Masjid al-Nabawi, the Rawdah, how far is between the end of the Rawdah and Qabr al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You have the mimbar or the mihrab. As you're praying towards the mihrab, on the left, in your side, there's the Qabr al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How close is it? The Hujra. That's where his Hujra was. That's where his room was with Aisha radiyallahu anha. And that's one of the reasons why, as we'll come to see, Ali radiyallahu anhu, he left Medina. He left Medina so he doesn't create bloodshed and fighting and inside the Prophet or Medina al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So the siege, they began on the Medina of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, on Uthman by boycotting him and keeping him in his household. And we'll mention next week, inshallah ta'ala, how the Sahaba reacted, how Ummahatul Mu'mineen reacted, how the people of Medina reacted, and how it ended, unfortunately, and how it ended with the death of Uthman radiallahu anhu in his own house. In his own house. Ajib. Wallahi, every time you remember the story of Uthman, you say Ajib. Amazing. Strange how the Khalifah of the Muslimin, the strongest position at that time, not only amongst the Muslimin, in the whole world. The Khalifa of the Muslimin is killed in his own house. Is killed in his own house. And not wallah assassinated quietly and go, no. When we come and see what they did, Allahu Akbar. What can make people reach to the extent where they do an action like that? Shaitan. Subhanallah, how shaitan can play with the minds of people and get them to do the worst of things. The worst of things. Every time, subhanallah, and this is throughout history. This is throughout history. Yusuf alayhi salam, قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤياك على إخوتك فيكيدوا لك كيدا إن الشيطان للإنسان عدو مبين. He said, Ya Yusuf, my son, don't tell what you saw to your brothers. فيكيدوا لك كيدا. Your own brothers. Your own brothers. After that, they'll plot and plan against you. Verily, shaitan is a clear enemy. After that, they came to the extent, اقتلوا Yusuf. Imagine their own brothers. اقتلوا يوسف أو اطرحوه أرضا يخل لكم وجه أبيكم وتكونوا من بعده قوما صالحين. Subhanallah, how shaitan can get into the mind of those who are even the closest to you. Yusuf alayhi salam, his own brothers. And the father, subhanallah, the hikmah of his father, told his son, oh my son, don't speak about it. Don't mention it in front of your brothers. Because your brothers, they will what? Your brothers, they will plot and plan against you. But this is history repeating itself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep the Muslims firm. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite the Muslimin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite us on the word of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the understanding of the khulafa. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the implementation of the deen and the implementation of the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
I wanna be in Jannah, Jannah, Jannah. Every Muslim dreams to be up in Jannah, 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 Jannah. A pious person's destiny. Inshallah in Jannah, Jannah, Jannah.